If you started playing Starvester thinking it was just another chill space survival, let me warn you right now, you are severely underestimating this game. Behind that seemingly simple exploration, there are a lot of hidden systems, and that's exactly why a lot of people get stuck, lose progress, or take way longer than they should to evolve. So in this video, I'm going to show you 10 advanced tips that really changed my gameplay, and maybe they will help you too. So if you want to stop suffering and start truly mastering the game, stick with me until the end. I'm Mary, and the video is about to start. I always feel that in any incremental game, research is the real engine that drives everything else. When I started playing Starvester, I realized that even having plenty of metal and fuel on hand, progress always stalled whenever I neglected research layer. That's when I understood that research isn't just another stat. It acts as a multiplier that boosts every resource you collect, making each subsequent upgrade much more powerful. Therefore, my first step in every new run is to invest aggressively in research drones and the upgrades that increase both the speed and the amount of research produced. I put my drones to work in parallel with metal extraction, but I dedicate most of the initial upgrade points to accelerating research generation. The faster I can climb the research levels, the faster the production bonuses stack up, creating a snowball effect that benefits all other areas of the game. After ensuring that research is at a fast pace, I turn my attention back to metal, as it's the basic raw material to build more drones and support structures. Only then do I balance fuel, which is necessary to keep expeditions and exploration missions active. Finally, with a solid base of metal and fuel, I reinforce research even more, closing the growth cycle. This sequence, metal, then fuel, and then research, prevents bottlenecks and keeps the resource flow healthy at all times. If you follow this order and don't hesitate to allocate a good portion of your early upgrade points into research, you'll notice that every run progresses much smoother, and those moments of stagnation become increasingly rare. It's a rewarding feeling to see the numbers skyrocket when the research multiplier finally kicks into full gear. Give it a try and let me know how your progression went in the comments. Man, it took me way too long to understand the real power of satellites in Starvester, and I confess that in the beginning, I simply ignored them. I'd look at these structures orbiting the planets and think they were just a decorative bonus, something secondary that didn't change my production much. But after the first prestige, reality hit. They aren't just useful, they become the core of your strategy. That's when the game shifts to another level and you finally feel your numbers truly start to explode. What I learned the hard way is that positioning isn't just a detail, it's everything. You don't just throw a satellite on any forgotten celestial body in the corner of the solar system just because you can. The secret is to be selective and invest where the resource gravity is strong. Planets and moons that have good yields and will generate a constant return while you manage other parts of your empire. I spent hours with satellites floating in useless places thinking I was being efficient, when in reality I was leaving production on the table. Now, if there's one thing that completely breaks the progression curve, it's the upgrades that increase satellite effectiveness based on your prestige tier. It seems like just another upgrade tree, but in practice, it means that every reset you do to gain permanent bonuses absurdly multiplies what these satellites produce. I only noticed the massive difference when, out of nowhere, my resource generation skyrocketed without me having to actively click or micromanage anything. The game basically started playing itself for me. If you are at that point in the mid-game where it feels like progression has stalled, or in the late game where the numbers should be higher, check your satellite network right now. Make sure they are on celestial bodies that are actually worth it, and prioritize those prestige upgrades before anything else. This isn't just optimization, it's what turns Starvester from a stalled incremental game into a machine of absurd numbers. This tip saved my playthrough, and I'm sure it will make yours skyrocket too. One of the biggest turning points for me was to stop being greedy with the prestige system. At first, I always fell into that just a little bit more mindset before resetting, trying to squeeze every drop out of the current run. But the truth is, when progress starts to stall, you've already passed the sweet spot. Insisting on staying there only delays what really matters, which is coming back stronger in the next run. Today, I treat prestige as a central part of the strategy, not as an end of cycle. As soon as I feel progression has genuinely slowed, I prepare to reset without a second thought, because it's exactly this timing that ensures you come back with massive advantages instead of wasting time trying to force growth that has already stagnated. And that's where the secret comes in, choosing wisely what to invest those prestige points in. I always prioritize permanent upgrades that directly impact the foundation of the run, like fuel gain per tier, increased research, and starting drones. Drone multipliers are also incredibly strong, especially the ones that scale with each prestige point because they keep getting better with every reset. When you nail this cycle, prestiging at the right time and investing in the right upgrades, the game practically transforms. The next run starts much faster, more efficiently, and you clearly feel that you are breaking the normal pace of progression. It's that moment when everything clicks and you realize you finally understand how the game wants to be played. At the beginning of my journey, I'll be honest with you, I had an almost crazy fixation on hoarding rare ores and expanding colonies, while fuel was left in the background as if it were just an annoying detail to manage. But there comes a point in the game, especially when you're unlocking the final technologies and trying to maintain multiple space operations simultaneously, that you realize without fuel, nothing works. It's as if your entire empire has been riding a bicycle up until now, and out of nowhere, it needs to fuel an entire fleet of intergalactic cargo ships. The turning point happens when you stop treating fuel as something that resolves itself and start investing heavily in 3 specific fronts. First, hunt down every fuel gain upgrade that appears in your tech tree, because that multiplied base gain makes an absurd difference when scaled. Second, prioritize building space elevators. I underestimated these structures for a while, thinking they were just orbital decoration, but they inject an absurd amount of efficiency into fuel extraction and transport. And third, dedicate mining rigs specifically to fuel, even if it means leaving other resources aside for a moment. What the community already knows, and what took me a while to accept, is that in Starvester's endgame, literally everything revolves around this resource. It's no exaggeration to say that all your advanced production chains, travel between systems, and maintenance of prestige structures consume fuel like there's no tomorrow. You can have the best titanium or gold mining upgrades, but if the tank is on reserve, your fleet stops in space, and your top-tier factories become dead weight. It's kind of frustrating when it happens, but it's also a clear sign that your economy needs restructuring. Ever since I changed my mindset and started seeing fuel as the true king resource, my progression completely stopped stalling. The numbers finally started growing again. I stopped feeling stuck with that sensation of doing everything right but not advancing, and the game gained a new fluidity. So if you're reaching that final phase and feel like something is missing, trust me, embrace fuel, invest in it without hesitation, and watch your space empire finally take off for real. One thing I underestimated in Starvester is the power of manual clicking, especially when I started unlocking upgrades that improve this gain. At first, it seems somewhat secondary, almost disposable compared to automation, but as you advance, clicking or even holding the click becomes a very strong strategic tool. I started noticing this when I needed a quick spike in resources to finish an expensive upgrade. Instead of waiting for passive production, I started using clicks more actively, mainly holding it down during specific moments. With prestige upgrades that increase gain per click, this practically becomes an on-demand boost, perfect for unlocking something that is right there but would take too long through automatic generation alone. The secret, at least for me, is not clicking all the time without purpose. I save this feature for key moments, like when I'm close to buying an important upgrade or accelerating a turning point in the run. Using clicks like this consciously makes much more of a difference than simply spamming from the beginning without a strategy. When you pair this with the rest of your progression, especially with prestige bonuses, the impact becomes even clearer. It's almost like having a fast-forward button that you activate at the right time. And in an incremental game where timing is everything, this kind of control can easily be the difference between a slow run and a run that truly takes off. I made a classic mistake for way too long, throwing all my drones into a single function thinking it would speed everything up. In the beginning, it even seems to work, especially when you want to force mining or research faster. But this breaks your progression without you realizing it. The game is much more about flow than brute force in a single area. What really changed my game was starting to divide the drones well between 3 pillars: mining, research, and logistics. If you go overboard on mining, you'll lack processing and transport. If you focus only on research, you won't have the resources to sustain the upgrades. And if you ignore logistics, everything starts to choke. Starvester punishes imbalance silently, and by the time you notice, you have bottlenecks everywhere. After a few prestiges, this becomes even more evident because you start with a much larger amount of drones right away. And that's exactly where a lot of people go wrong again. They use this initial excess to hyper-focus on just one thing. In practice, this initial excess is your chance to build a balanced foundation from the very first minute and truly accelerate the snowball effect, with production, research, and flow moving together. When you get this distribution right, the game simply flows. You stop having to tweak everything every minute because something stalled, and you start seeing steady growth in all areas. For me, this was one of those simple tweaks that seem small, but in practice completely changed the pace of the run. If your progression feels weird or inconsistent, the problem is almost always in the way you are using your drones. One of the strongest things they discovered in the mid-game was how absurdly research drones scale when you start hoarding them in large numbers. At first, they just seem like another piece of the research system. But when those upgrades hit that give a percentage bonus per drone, everything changes completely. There was a moment when I surpassed 50 research drones, and that's when it clicked. With upgrades that give plus 1% to metals and fuel per drone, you basically turn your passive production into an absurd scaling machine. It's no longer just about generating research, it's about converting each drone into a global multiplier that affects all your resources at the same time. Since then, whenever I enter the mid-game, I heavily prioritize increasing that number. I don't just balance basic production, I think directly about how to scale these drones as fast as possible, because unlike other upgrades that give fixed or limited gains, this type of bonus grows with you and gets stronger with each new run. When you get this right, the game just takes off. Metals and fuel start to go up much faster with you doing practically nothing, and that frees up space to focus on other optimizations. It's a strategy that sounds simple, but once it gears up, it easily becomes one of the most efficient ways to dominate the mid-game. If you are spending too much time stuck on Vesta, I'll tell you straight up, you are delaying your own progress. I did this too in the beginning, trying to extract everything I could from the starting planet before thinking about expanding. But Starvester does not reward this kind of mindset. The game is clearly designed to push you outwards, and the sooner you understand that, the faster your economy truly begins to grow. The first time I started exploring other celestial bodies like nearby moons or even Cinderoon was when I realized how limited I had been without knowing it. Each new place isn't just more space, it's access to new types of resources, new structures, and above all, new ways to scale your production. It's as if the game opens up multiple layers at once, and you no longer depend on a single planet for everything. And there's a detail that a lot of people underestimate. These new locations unlock fundamental structures like space elevators and satellites in much more efficient contexts. It's not just about building more, it's about building better. When you combine expansion with the strategic positioning of these structures, your production stops growing linearly and starts scaling in a much more aggressive way. Once I stopped treating Vesta as an eternal main base and started seeing it just as the starting point, the game's pace changed completely. Progression became faster, more fluid, and I stopped feeling that classic mid-game stall. So if you are still too comfortable on the starting planet, that is exactly the sign that it's way past time to expand. One thing that took me a while to realize is that speed isn't always the best choice. There's a specific moment in the run where increasing the amount, that is, the quantity of resources per cycle, brings much more results than simply speeding up production. This becomes even more evident when you already have a good number of drones working. I've had runs where I invested heavily in speed, thinking I was optimizing everything, but the gain wasn't as expressive as I expected. When I started testing amount upgrades, especially with many active drones, the jump in production was much more noticeable. Each cycle yielded more, and this accumulated very quickly, creating more consistent growth. The key point here is understanding the context of your run. If you still have few drones, speed might actually help more early on. But when your operation is already large, increasing the value of each collection starts to scale better. It's the kind of fine-tuning that makes a difference without seeming obvious at first glance. Nowadays, I always alternate and test this balance during the run instead of following a single fixed logic. And honestly, this kind of adaptation is what separates a standard progression from a truly efficient run. When you get this timing right, you can feel that the game starts yielding much more with less effort. I'll be blunt. Spreading points around the prestige tree is a classic trap in Starvester. It seems tempting to grab several small upgrades in different areas as if you were becoming well-rounded, but in practice, this just dilutes your power. I fell for this in the first few runs, and the result was always the same. Slow progress and the feeling that prestige wasn't really paying off. The turning point comes when you start focusing on global multipliers. Anything that increases drone efficiency, global resource gain, or starting bonuses has a much bigger impact than it seems on paper. These upgrades don't just improve one part of your empire, they amplify absolutely everything at the same time. It's the kind of choice that you feel throughout the entire run, from start to finish. Another thing that changed my game was choosing one or at most two strong paths within the tree per run. Instead of trying to grab a little bit of everything, I started setting a clear strategy before resetting. This run will be focused on global production, or this one will accelerate my early game with starting bonuses. This makes your decisions much more efficient and creates a much more consistent progression between prestiges. After I started playing like this, the impact of each reset became much more noticeable. It wasn't just a little push anymore, it was a real leap in power. So if you're feeling like your prestige isn't paying off the way it should, the problem probably isn't a lack of points, it's a lack of focus.